I am Kris Stancil. I'm a captain with the Picken Sheriff's Office. I work in public information and the administrative services side of the Sheriff's Office. We're here today to kind of go over some details of a case that involves a local high school teacher where an arrest was made. Just to give you a timeline and some information regarding the arrest, we received some information approximately 1 week ago with details from a concerned citizen that they had overheard or overseen some communication between a teacher at Pickens High School by the name of Daniel Culbreth. Daniel Culbreth had been sending messages via Snapchat, a popular app for teens that communicate with female students. In those Snapchats, apparently some of the content of the communication was sexual in nature. Detectives immediately jumped on the case. Fortunately, we have a detective that works with our office, Detective Stephen Holmes, who also works with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation with their Internet Crimes Against Children task force, they're known as the ICAC task force. He's received a significant amount of training to work specific to those cases. Detective Holmes worked immediately to get a search warrant sent off to Snapchat to preserve those records and to request those records to be sent. Those records were then sent and provided to the Sheriff's Office, and we received those on Thursday the 6th. After reviewing those records, it was confirmed that the teacher, Daniel Culbreth, was in fact having multiple conversations with multiple students, multiple female students at Pickens High School that were very sexual in nature. Some were just conversations, some involved images, some involved correlation that involved possibly meeting up. Detectives worked the case further that led to interviews with both students and with their parents, that led to additional search warrants being completed as they felt comfortable that enough probable cause existed to reach out to Mr. Culbreth last night. An arrest was made. Mr. Culbreth was taken into custody without incident. He was arrested and brought here to the Pickens Adult Detention Center where he was booked in. He is waiting, or actually currently participating in, his first appearance hearing to where they will determine whether or not bond is going to be set for what he is here for. During these interviews and along with the interviews and reviewing the contents of the Snapchat material, it does appear that not only was he having inappropriate message communications via Snapchat and social media and things of that nature, but he also had a physical relationship with at least one student that has been confirmed as well. At this time, the detectives are continuing to be very proactive in following up with additional search warrants. Those search warrants are for electronic devices, multiple other ways that they're reaching out to try to verify and find out if there are additional victims, if there's additional evidence, to look into exactly how much further, how much more broad this case may reach and may go. They have been working very closely with school administrators and with other individuals involved at Pickens High School and with the Pickens County Board of Education. They've been extremely cooperative. We did do all we could to hold off until we had to reach out to the school to notify them of exactly what was going on. We didn't want to cause alarm based just off of a rumor, but wanted to wait until we did confirm that the information was in fact valid. Typically, we would love to wait until we've been able to execute all search warrants and gather all the data, but unfortunately, because he was a teacher and we had confirmed that he was having physical contact and cyber contact with these students, we couldn't leave him in a classroom setting having contact. Our number one priority is the safety of the students, so we had to move forward on that. We're urging all parents, especially, we're urging all parents to get directly involved in your kids' social media. Look into who they're friends with, look into what they're texting, look into what they're putting out on social media. See if they're actually friending their teachers. See if they're friending, especially students at Pickens High School, if they friended Mr. Culbreth and what kind of communication they may have been having. Get involved, ask them questions. We unfortunately believe that there is the potential that there are additional students that may be involved in this as well. And that's why it is an ongoing investigation, and additional charges may be pending at this time. We would also like to refer anybody that has any concerns or would like to know more information on what they can look out for to get online. You can look up the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. They have a website. You can Google that information. It's GBI's ICAC will pull up their information for their website. You can go through and review things that you can look for, things that you can be concerned about, and ways that you can reach out and talk to those kids. That way you can look for it. At this time, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that I'm able to relating to the case.
I just had a couple of questions.
Yes.
When you said images were sent back and forth, I'm assuming they were nude images?
Yes.
Was it both parts sending pictures, like male and female, or can you talk about that?
At this time, yes, it appears that both sending and receiving was taking place, yes.
Okay, and then the physicals, assuming again sex.
Yes.
Is the student a current student?
Yes,
Okay.
Current student.
How does something like this affect a town like yours? I mean, it's small knit, and
Yeah.
everybody knows everybody, and
It's-
what I get from people in town is,
Right.
he lived here, his parents were teachers, that type of thing.
Right.
How does that go to the fabric of this community?
It's a shock. It's definitely a shock to the school system, especially in this particular case because, as you said, his parents are active in teaching in the school system as well, and it affects everything. It affects the students. It affects the community, the parents. It's kind of affects the trust that people have in what's there, and what we're hoping is that parents and students alike can see that both the school system and the sheriff's office show zero tolerance. That the moment that something has been identified, that we've acted swiftly, that we're going to do all that we can to ensure that the safety of their kids is number one, and that we're not going to allow something like this to continue. Even though it does rock the community, we're not going to allow the fear of rocking the community prevent us from being willing to say that we're going to protect our kids.
Do you have a time frame? I don't know if you get it. What's the crime? Is the crime just a Snapchatting, or is that a crime in itself? Just Snapchatting a juvenile? I don't know.
That Snapchatting itself, no, it's not a crime. Is it a violation of ethics? It's depending on the system as to what your rules and regulations and policies. I can't go into what our school systems policies say about teachers' contact with students. Different systems are going to have different rules and regulations as to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Once that conversation turns from just carrying on a conversation to say, hey, how's your mom and dad, to, hey, do you want to hook up, then you've crossed a line. There is an expectation as a teacher that you're there to provide that service as a teacher, not to date, not to have that type of relationship. And there are laws in the state of Georgia that prevent. There are different laws that are in place for that reason in particular. It's difficult for us at times to realize that high school students may appear to be adults, but the majority of the time, and in this particular case, the majority of the students were in the 16 to 17-year-old range. 16 to 17 may physically appear to be an adult, but they're not. They're still considered to be children. They're still considered to be minors, and they haven't quite developed the thought processes that an adult should have. And in this particular case, he's the one that should have and was taught and has signed contracts and has attended classes to teach him that he knew right from wrong and made the wrong choice.
And what's the time period, if you can talk about that, from when it just started being Snapchat to the physical? Yeah, like I said, you can't answer.
At this time, I really can't answer. I know that some of the additional search warrants that they're moving forward with will divulge that information. Unfortunately, there's multiple students involved, so I think there's different time periods from one relationship to the other. There's different levels of what was still just a conversation versus what was beyond a verbal conversation to something beyond that. So that's something that will come out as the investigation develops a little bit further. some more search warrants are executed, some more interviews are completed, and we'll be able to kind of fill in some of those blanks as that goes further.
Now, I don't know if you know how many students at the school, because the thing you're giving me is, it's not a big high school.
I
So-
think 1,300 roughly,
Okay.
somewhere in the ballpark of
So-
1,300 students. Yes, sir.
Because it just, I mean, when you talk about a school, if it's that close, I mean, a lot of these kids are gonna know each other. Is there gonna be any type of mental kind of, I don't know if it's.
It will be something. I know that the school is monitoring closely, speaking with some of the school officials, to see how much it's affecting the conversations, to see what size of a group it's affecting, to see. They're going to watch this closely so that they can see whatever needs to be there. We've made it known that any assistance the sheriff's office can provide in any way, shape, or fashion, whether it be our school resource officers or deputies or the sheriff himself, any of our command staff will be more than happy to come over and participate in anything that we can do to try to help ease the transition, the feeling of safety. We have in the past taught and worked with students, especially on the middle school level before they reach the high school level, on the dangers of internet safety, that, you know, what gets put or emailed or texted or put on the internet, it's now it's public, you can't go back and take it back. And those type of lessons are things that you have to constantly keep updating. And some of those things, I think cases like this really bring to light how that can get out of control really, really fast. And so we're working closely with the school system. We're going to provide any resources we can. Obviously, I can't answer that question for them, but at the same time, we've worked close enough with them to know that they're monitoring and watching as close as they can to provide whatever resources they need to for the students.
How long has he been a teacher at Pickens High School?
I don't have that time. 2011, so right at 5 years.
And roughly how many girls was he Snapchatting?
I could not give you that exact number. There were.
Is there a ballpark?
It's a difficult situation because of the usernames not matching up with the exact names of students. So we know the ones that we have identified at this point, and that number keeps growing as the investigation is still going on. And there are also usernames that we're trying to identify whether those individuals are students, or are they adults, or are they former students. So, or are they just individuals that he knew from other locations. So those are things that the detectives are having to go through, and it's a labyrinth of username madness, because some of these names are very unique, and they're having to just go through and do everything they can to process and identify who these individuals are, whether it's through interviewing other students to try to find out, do you know this name, do you know who this individual is, and then whatever other resources they can find to do that. As they're going through and identifying them, then they're obviously trying to reach out to those families to interview or to speak with those individual families. We were trying to be very careful and limited during the initial onset of the investigation to keep the word of mouth from spreading too fast. We wanted to stick to the ones that we really felt very confident were victims specific to the case. And then now that the arrest has been made and the case has been established, now we can be a little bit more broad in reaching out to those students. So in terms of the number, it's very difficult. I know that we've identified at least 5 students in the high school that we've spoke with that were involved specifically in Snapchat conversations, but there are additional individuals. We just don't know for sure that they're students or not yet.
If some of those usernames turn out to be a student who has graduated but was a student at the time, can you go back and file charges on something like that?
If they were a student of his and the incident was occurring during that time, yes, we could. As long as we're within a statute of limitations. That it'll be unique on a case by case in determining what exactly was communicated or what crime was committed. That'll just depend on the severity of each case. It can be and will be if that's proven during that time. But it's going to grow as they go and identify each individual. We have found a few that we know have graduated this past year that are currently college students. But we've got to reach back month by month to get into what conversations were taking place during last year's school year prior to them leaving Pickens High School. So,
with evidence collected so far, how long does the sheriff's office believe he's been interacting with students in this manner?
I don't have that exact answer. We do know that this has been going on for several months at this point in time, based on the interviews and Snapchat data that we've been able to collect at this time. As far as an exact time period, we haven't reached the bottom of that bit of information yet, but that is one of the goals that we're reaching toward now.
Well, you mentioned you might have a couple students who could potentially be college students this year. Do you have
Yes.
any from further than last school year?
Not that we're aware of yet. We do know that there are friends that appear to be older, but we don't know the extent of their relationships at this time. Snapchat keeps the information for a certain period of time. They don't hold on the information for an indefinite period of time, so we're limited in the data that we're able to collect on the first round of search warrants. So as they continue the investigation, they'll find a lot more.
Is this guy a predator in your book? Is this your classic? Or what's his demeanor? Apparently these guys are really friendly and they make friends. You know what I mean? Or is this your just classic predator? Is that what you label?
It's difficult to label in this particular situation. I know that there's ways that you could label in that direction. The evidence in this case appears that he reached out and had a thing for young high school girls. Whether he had a limit into an age or not, we're not aware at this point. As the case develops and grows, we'll know a little bit further. What we do know is that we wanted to get him off the streets and out of the schools before we reached a point where we were confident to stand here and say he could have been a predator. We feel confident that before we could stand here and you asked me that question where I had to look you in the eye and say, yes, I'm sure he was a predator, we feel like we got him out of there before that answer became a definite yes. Could we have been moving in that direction? Possibly. But fortunately, our detectives really worked fast, and they did an incredible job of gathering data very quick and working with victims very quick, and they handled getting him out of there as fast as they could.
Now, what is he? I don't know. I doubt this. What is his official charges as of right now?
As of right now, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, Georgia allows you to have 48 hours before you have the warrants on all official charges. I know in the release we mentioned a couple of different charges. I know the detectives are working with the district attorney's office and with the courts right now. There's a possibility these charges are going to fluctuate or change. I'm kind of looking at one of the detectives behind you as we speak, so that way I don't speak out of turn here. So are we comfortable to go with the same that was in the release?
Usually the sexual assault
Okay.
right now is
Yeah.
is the official one.
The sexual assault by persons of supervisory authority is the definite charge that they're moving forward with. There's, as I mentioned before, there more than likely will be additional charges moving forward as the investigation continues and as they prepare for a grand jury case down the road as they build this investigation up. There are a multitude of places. I know that in working on the investigation, there were dozens of additional warrants and search warrants that they were looking at places that they were going to have to dig and look further into other information that will collect just a massive amount of evidence for them to plow through. So as the case builds, more will be coming out for sure.
I know you said that they're doing additional warrants. Is that for other social media sites?
Yes. We have found that he did have other social media accounts on other social media, pretty much all of your common social media sites, and so they're going to complete other search warrants based on what was found on this one, so that they can review and verify if there was other ways of contacting students as well.
And he's sticking primarily to 16, 17-year-olds in the high school. He hasn't gone any younger than that, to your knowledge?
We've not found anything at this point that's indicated that at all.
Is there any sign of involvement of other adults, whether school staff or non-staff, just other adults who were involved or had knowledge?
Not at this point, and I don't want to speak out of turn because that could easily come up in the future, but at this point it appears to be isolated to him. As I said before, our goal is the safety of our kids, and if anybody else is identified, we will act swiftly. We will do everything we can. If that's identified, we will move as fast as we possibly can to have that taken care of as quick as possible.
Now, was he arrested after school or at home?
He was arrested after returning from a football game. We did pick him up, not at a school event, but at school property, not in the presence of any children or anyone that So it wasn't anything to cause a scene, but he was picked up at the school property, but not in the presence of anyone.
For Pickens High School students are going to be watching this story closely tonight,
Yes.
and they're going to hear that you guys have several other accounts that you have not identified that you're trying to, and one of these students is more than likely going to have, that's going to be the account that they're looking at. What would you say to them to make them not afraid to come and talk to you guys?
One, fortunately, as a student, we're going to protect who you are. We're going to protect the identity of any of the victims that we can identify and that we can speak with. We are not trying to look for a way to make anybody out to be a bad guy. As we've mentioned before, we understand that Mr. Culbreth is the individual in this particular case that went through the ethics training. He's the one that has been taught and trained that he's a responsible adult, that he's a professional in a career that's been told that it's inappropriate for him to have a relationship with a student. Whether the student feels that it was their fault that the relationship may have begun, or if they're the ones that reached out with a friend request or not, is irrelevant in that particular case. He's the one that knows that he's the one that has to say no. And that's just a point blank fact. And we want that point to get across to all students. We want that point to get across to all of the girls that may have been involved in that, whether they willingly were the ones that initiated that conversation or whether they were the ones that had that conversation initiated with them. We want them to understand that we are not trying to make them out to be somebody that's trying to target him. We want to sit down with them so that they can understand that he has been taught that this is inappropriate, this is wrong, this is something that he was not allowed to do, and it was a rule that he was told far in advance the consequences of if you violate this, what could happen. So we will do everything we can to protect not only their identity, but their story and their integrity. We will try to provide them any counseling, any resources, any help that we can as they come through and speak up. We want them to know, even if they feel like maybe the evidence has been destroyed, that there are a lot of ways that those things can be recovered. So if they can come forward and bring forth anything that they may have that can help prove and show what may have taken place, we really are urging them to come forward, speak to your parents, come in and speak to detectives. We will sit down and provide the resources we can provide to make it right, to do what we need to do.
With at least one of the relationships being physical, is there any sign that contact was forced or unwilling?
No, not at this time. No unwilling or forced at this time.
And I guess I know you were talking about the charges and still trying to figure it out. Does that have to do with the fact that Georgia, or not just Georgia, but laws aren't keeping up with technology? Does that make it hard to charge him because it's kind of that Snapchat?
It's
not a law for Snapchat.
It's not as much as hard. It's there's so many steps that have to be taken. For instance, if you retrieve the data for a Snapchat record and then you obtain a search warrant to obtain a cell phone, but then you have to go and obtain a separate search warrant to search that cell phone. And then if you find that there is a social media account, you have to then obtain a search warrant to get into that social media account. So it's just a slow process to go step by step, and then each one of those steps involves going through and evaluating all the data that's there. So for an average user that's only on these accounts once a day or twice a day, that's not a major ordeal. But for somebody that's spending a lot of time in conversation, any of you that may have teenagers in your home, that's a constant conversation that's going on, whether it's Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook or whatever the medium may be. Those conversations take a long time to go through, and then you have to take into account the photographs that go along with those and to compare those photographs as to when are the lines being crossed, what skin is being revealed, is these nude or these not nude, are these appropriate versus inappropriate, what conversation went with that photograph. And so unfortunately it's not sent to you in a clear to read manner. You have to sometimes read it in reverse from the end to the beginning, and so detectives have to take a lot of time to go through that data, on top of waiting for that data to come in. As I mentioned, it took us right at 4 to 5 days to receive that initial first search warrant so that we could then value through that data. Within half a day, we had enough information to move forward with making an arrest, but we had to wait 5 days to get that information. So It's not as much the laws as it is just the depth of technology, the amount of technology that we're having to go through, and then just the complexity and how many different ways there are out there. So
Now, is this federal or?
still on a state level.
Still-
Yeah, everything's still on a state level at this
And as
point.
of right now, what's the, like, sentence or whatever, what's the minimum?
It's each charge, and on that particular charge, it is a felony charge that can carry a severe punishment by state law. So I don't want to quote because there's different subsections within that section of the law. So depending on what subsection it is, I don't want to tell you that some subsections can reach up to a life sentence. Now, whether this particular one qualifies, we don't know at this point.
Teaching days are over.
I would believe so, but that's going to be up to the state certification. So
Just because I don't fully understand the computer exploitation, was he just saving these? Were he saving these pictures to his hard drive, or was he putting them on a website?
at this point, we don't know. That's going to be a part of the search warrants that we're going to have to execute at this point. Right now, what we do know is that he was having these conversations with these girls and that these photos were being exchanged back and forth through Snapchat. That's through the execution of a Snapchat search warrant. We have not completed search warrants on his phone, on any hard drive devices or anything at this point. That becomes a whole different crime at that point in time. At this point, we know that those conversations were taking place both from executing search warrants and from interviewing victims and talking to the victims about what both their involvement was and his involvement. So we're moving forward based on the information from both of those things corroborating. As we continue to get more search warrants and continue to go through those phones and to review that data, then we'll be able to make a more solid statement. If in fact he does possess photographs or nude photographs of students that were sent to him that he saved to a hard drive, then a different crime has been committed completely if they were under the age of 18. So those will be things that we'll have to look at as we move forward.
And you're saying he's already did his first appearance?
As we were starting this hearing, that was beginning as well. So we'll know.
Now, is that for bond, or are you guys still going to try to hold him for 48 hours?
They were going to discuss the bond on his initial charge during that first appearance, or make a discussion as to whether or not they're going to schedule a bond hearing from there.
You have a mugshot picture of him?
Did you not get it in the initial
they
press
just sent
release?
me an
Okay,
email.
I'll send you one, or we can print one out right when we finish.
Okay.
It was sent with the press release.
Okay,
We can
they
get one.
probably have it, they just
Okay.
sent me one.
Yeah, that's fine. We can get that, no problem. Anything else?
I think you covered it.